Welcome, 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 listeners. Another episode of hopefully what you'll find are very helpful, actionable tips so that my goal for you is to have less worry and more life. Who doesn't want that? So today's guest, Elizabeth Sherman, is a longtime health coach with amazing certifications in things like hormonal health, wellness, personal training, life coaching. So she's the package deal. And her bottom line is to be helping women specifically in midlife. So even if you're not there yet, listen in because it's coming. And how to have sustainable, keyword, sustainable, healthy habits. So, welcome, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Marie, for having me. I am super excited about our conversation today.
We have a lot of overlap, I think, in what we do. And interestingly, you and I have talked before that my first professional career was as a registered dietitian. So, the whole nutrition side of things, I tease my clients now that I used to help people balance their diet and exercise, and now I help them balance their finances. So, it's all very behavior related. But the tie-in is the more we take care of our mind and our body, the less we have to worry about running out of money because good health costs less. So here you are on the good health side of things, and we all evolve to what we do eventually anyway, what our passion becomes, usually because of some story or incident that's happened in our life. So I'm curious what your journey has been to get you to being a health coach.
Yeah. So it actually ties in exactly with what you're talking about. My story, as far as health goes, really starts with, unfortunately, in 2001, my mom passed away from breast cancer.
Mm.
And at the time, she was 63 years old. She was a an accountant. She had done everything as far as investing and saving. In fact, when little story here, when she was in the hospital, this was back in 2001, 2000. And remember, like I had a pager for work. Remember
Mm.
pagers? Am I
Yeah,
dating
yeah.
myself? Yes. And
Phone
this was one
change.
of those text pagers where you could text like, right?
Mhm.
And one of the features in that pager was you could send to a specific number like stock symbols, and it would come back and tell you what those
Oh.
values were.
Mm.
And so here we are in the hospital. She is dying of cancer like the days before she dies. And she's like, Beth, which is what my family calls me, go check my stock prices. So, like, I had her stock prices already like programmed into my pager and I would send it to her. And like, it gave her such a thrill to know that she
No.
was, getting money. Anyway, getting ahead of myself. So, like she had everything already set up, but growing up, we really were not I'm one of six kids, and we really were not encouraged to go into sports or really pay attention to our bodies. My parents really focused on the arts. Like we all had to play an instrument and we were all encouraged to perform in plays. But, being on a sports team, like doing volleyball or something like that, was really considered extracurricular and really not important. And, growing up in the 70s, my mom was really focused on how do I feed eight people on a budget, right? Because she wasn't working at the time, my dad was.
Mhm.
And so, anyway, yeah, like I really didn't learn anything about nutrition. I didn't learn anything about exercise. I didn't really know anything about my body, even. And I remember talking to one of her doctors when they were visiting her in the hospital. And I had just started exercising. There was a Bally's Total Fitness that had just opened up around the corner of my house. And I started exercising. And I remembered asking him, like, how do I not get breast cancer?
Mm.
Or like, she had gone into the hospital because she had broken her arm. She will tell you that her arm broke. And so he was telling me about how important strength training is because it strengthens your bones. And so anyway, after she passed away, I remember sitting there Googling, how do I not get breast cancer? And finding out that what our lifestyle habits are a huge risk factor to getting the disease. And although, we know now that just because you have certain lifestyle factors doesn't mean that you're going to get cancer. There are obviously genetic things and other aspects to getting cancer that we still are slightly unclear about. But the way that I looked at it for myself was, how do I get as healthy as possible so that I can fight this disease?
Mhm.
And so that really kind of started my quest on getting myself together. I was working in high tech at the time and eventually decided to go all in on health. Yeah.
Mhm. Boy, those life changes can definitely impact you. It's interesting you mentioned lifestyle versus genetics. And a phrase I'll never forget is that your genes load the gun and your lifestyle pulls the trigger. So it's good to know that yes, we may be predisposed, but there's a lot of action we can take to help temper what the genes have, preloaded into our DNA. And so I'm curious then, what made you focus then on the midlife area for women? I know that probably when I was in my 40s, somebody had said, "Oh, Marie, every decade something new will happen with your body." And, that was a couple decades ago, and they were right.
It is true. But I mean, there's also, just to take a little segue here, there's also the freedom that we get as women. Like every decade, I also feel so much less pressure and stress about who I'm supposed to be. Like there's just this freedom, especially since I turned 50,
Mhm.
that like I just, yeah,
Older and
love
wiser,
this
right?
side of menopause. But to answer your question, so I started out as a personal trainer and nutritionist, and all of my clients were actually women in midlife. And eventually, so here's what's funny, like as a 30-ish year old, 40-ish year old woman who does not have children, I was actually kind of a jerk in terms of like the circumstances that I had in my life, not having children, being a personal trainer, having a supportive partner who, was able to earn an income that allowed me to build my business. I really did not understand the menopausal, postmenopausal body. And I was like, well, but it worked for me. Like doing these things worked for me. And like, why isn't it working for you? Like,
Mhm.
why you must not be being compliant.
Yeah.
And then the universe has this really great way of tapping you on the shoulder and showing you that, yeah, maybe life isn't that simple. Maybe it's not just what you eat and how you exercise that, you know, impacts
Mhm.
what your body looks like or how it performs. And so when I started going through perimenopause, that's when I was like, oh, I get it.
Mhm.
Like these things happen to all of us. And no one had really told me that. Like I knew I was going into perimenopause
Sure.
at some point or that I would be in midlife but I don't know. It's this weird thing where you don't expect that to happen to you. And
Mhm.
so anyway, um I've realized that we need to be so much more compassionate with ourselves and with other women. And
Mhm.
so that's really been the passion part of it. Is I went into health coaching with the intention of, how do I prevent just one person from going through the experience that my mom went through? And in that process, it's really kind of morphed into, how do I share what I've learned with so many more women? Because we need to get this information out there.
Yeah, great. And thankful that you are because there's so many areas. And in the essence of time, I'm gonna focus on three of your areas, even though there are more, nutrition, movement, and what you call recovery, aka sleep. So if we were to think about nutrition in midlife in particular, what you think are the common either issues or misconceptions that would be really helpful for our listeners to be aware of?
Well, so I think that it's like in those three areas,
Yeah,
one of the things that I think is so ironic about midlife is that I've started observing that in midlife, the bad habits that we picked up when we were younger, like, rear their nasty heads.
they come back to bite us.
They really do. They
Yeah.
just like have this spotlight shining on them. Like, oh yeah, you know how you used to, run to sweets whenever you were stressed out, or alcohol? Yeah, now that's not a really great solution for that. And you know how you used to use exercise as a way to burn off those sweets? Yeah, that's not really a great method either. And you know how you never really paid attention to your sleep? Well, yeah, now it's really becoming evident. And so I think that within midlife, it becomes one of those things where we start to look at our health habits and we say, okay, what I'm doing isn't really working. So, how do I have a better relationship with nutrition, with movement, and with my sleep? How do I prioritize that? Because each of these habits, each of these aspects to our health, they really intersect. Like when we don't eat properly, we don't feel like exercising. And when we don't exercise, we don't sleep really well. When we don't sleep well, we make really bad choices as far as eating, and we don't feel like exercising. Like it's all tied together. And it each of the habits is intersected, but they also prop each other up. So, with that being said, I think that one of the things that I'm really passionate about is, and I mentioned it in passing before, is we each have life circumstances. For women in midlife, we really have all of these things that are competing for our time. We have children that are probably moving out, so they may need more support in one way and less support in another. Our relationships are changing. Our parents may start to need us more. Our jobs become a little bit more demanding because most women in this area are really in high pressure jobs. And so we really need to look at those life circumstances and figure out, how do I manage my eating? How do I manage my movement? And how do I manage my recovery so that I'm doing, I don't say the bare minimum, but what I can do within the confines of those circumstances. Like I had mentioned earlier, when I was a 40-year-old, woman without any kids, like I had lots of free time. And so I could achieve better health than someone who was a little bit older, who didn't have the recovery capacity because our bodies age. and who had children, for example, who really need to spend time on those kids. So I love the idea of what I call optimal health, which is everyone can achieve optimal health, but we do it based on the circumstances of our life. Did I answer your question?
Yes, and so you're right. You have to start where you are. And
Mm-hmm.
so give us an example. You have some great tools. You have a great newsletter. So maybe just one example of something important in the area of nutrition that
Yeah.
our listeners could say, yep, check, got that done. Or, oh, no, yeah, that's a good reminder. I need to get better at that.
Yeah, well, I have a really great guide and checklist. It's called the 8 Basic Habits That Healthy People Do. And it's got everything in there. But if I were to boil this down as far as nutrition goes, like two of the habits are drink water and eat vegetables. And as a coach, I love the idea of adding things to our diet, to our
Mhm.
day, so as to crowd out the things that we want to do less of.
Uh-huh.
When we think about improving our health, many women think about dieting. And when we think about dieting, we think about restriction, we think about deprivation, we think about all of the things that I can't have.
Mhm.
And so, what I want to suggest is that we can actually add good things to our diet that really kind of crowd out the things that we're spending more of our, you know, eating doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes
So, eat
sense. More
vegetables,
positive.
drink water.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, great advice. I love that replacing the negatives with more. Who doesn't want more? More
Mm-hmm.
water, more veggies. Got
Yeah.
it. And how about on the exercise realm of things, movement, the
Mm-hmm.
whole motion is lotion. And that to me is not just for your body and your joints, but also for your brain. Brain health needs blood flow. So exercise is so multi-purpose. So movement in general, I think, is more appealing to women versus, all right, I got to exercise, I got to go to the gym, I got to do X number of minutes or whatever. So exercise tips,
Yeah.
movement tips.
First of all, I think that as women in midlife, so something happens when we move out of our reproductive years. And that is that one, our bodies become more sensitive to insulin. So, what I'm talking about there is sugar and carbohydrates,
Mm.
but not all carbohydrates, really starches. And so, what many of us do is when we eat an influx of sugar or starch, we counteract that with exercise because we've grown up with the idea of eat less, move more, that calories in equals calories out.
Mhm.
And something needs to happen when we move into midlife in that we cannot use exercise as a form of calorie management. Because the other thing that happens is our bodies become more stress reactive, and exercise is a stress.
Mhm.
So, earlier when we were younger, if we ate cake or drank beer or whatever it was, we would just exercise a little bit harder or longer. That doesn't work anymore. We have to look at exercise as a form of stress management. So, just in the mindset shift alone, we need to look at exercise as a way of managing our stress versus counting calories and burning calories. And I
Mhm.
remember when I first learned this, my brain pretty much exploded. I was like, how is that even possible?
Sure.
But if you look at exercise as a way of feeling good, then you just have to find the method that makes you feel good, whether it's Zumba or yoga, or if you do like going to the gym, great. But do something that helps you to feel better. Um, I mentioned that one of the problems with my mom breaking her bones was having osteoporosis.
Mhm.
And strength training is one of the best ways to strengthen your bones. What happens is when we strength train, when we do load bearing exercises like walking or running, unfortunately, not swimming or cycling because there's not enough jarring. What happens is our bones get tiny little fractures in them. And those fractures don't hurt, but bone is one of the materials that in our body that it repairs itself with itself. So kind of like if you were to get a crack in your wall, you would put spackle over it. And so that's the same kind of thing when it comes to a bone. And so when we get these tiny little fractures in our bones, our bone or our body heals those fractures with additional bones, and it makes our bones so much stronger.
Mhm.
And so, when one of the concerns that many women have is that we don't want to be frail when we get older.
Right.
Like, no one wants to be worried about, uh, losing balance or breaking a bone.
Mhm.
And one of the great ways that you can do that is through exercise.
Awesome. No, you're right. That whole bone health thing, I think people forget until you have elderly parents, for example,
Mhm.
breaking bones. Did the arm break you know, or the
Yeah.
leg, or was that osteoporosis? Yeah, good
Yeah.
question. So
Hmm.
how about the whole um, repair, recovery of, I think of the brain when I think of sleep, but I know the whole
Hmm.
body needs the benefit of sleep as well. Recovery.
Yeah. For sure, the brain needs recovery. Yeah, it's so fascinating. 60 Minutes did a three-part study on sleep years and years and years ago. Sometimes you can catch it on YouTube and sometimes you can't, it goes away. But one of the things that I just found fascinating was they did this little thing in there where you learn so much better when you have 8 hours of sleep.
Mhm.
What's also really interesting is that when we sleep, they did this study where they interrupted people's sleep. So they got, disjointed sleep for a few days. And even though these people hadn't changed their diet at all, they noticed that they started exhibiting signs of diabetes
Mhm.
because our bodies repair and regenerate during those times. And so you might notice that when you don't get good sleep, the next day you find yourself like craving either sugar or salty carby things. This actually happened to one of my clients
Mhm.
that she was on business in a hotel. She didn't get really good sleep. And she found herself later in the company break room, like eating pretzels. And she was like, why am I doing this? And we were able to tie it
Mhm.
back to just having
Sure.
bad sleep and her needing energy. And the
Mhm.
brain knows that the easiest way to get energy is through carbohydrates. It's the easiest way. Yeah.
Right, right. Well, I know one of the things I remember from sleep is it must have been a brain health probably workshop that I was attending. They said think of sleep like the dishwasher cycle for your brain. And if you don't get the full hours, it's like opening your dishwasher before it got to the rinse cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a mess in there, and you need it all to be rinsed and fully cleaned out. So, from the brain perspective, as well as, well, that's why the thinking is so much clearer if you get 8+ hours of sleep, right? That makes so much sense. So, when I wrap up conversations, I'm usually thinking about, okay, are there kind of three key action items that our listeners could be walking away with? And you've done a great job of not showing the nutrition, water, more vegetables. On the movement side of things, especially strength training, I think and the stress management aspect. And then thirdly, with the 8 hours of sleep for recovery for the body and the brain. I think the question I'd like to ask you, because they all seem so important, and maybe the answer is individualized. If you had to pick one of those three that somebody should really start with, maybe it really depends on them and their body and their circumstances, but I'm curious what your answer is. Which one would it be of the three?
Well, yeah. So, like, the very first thing that I do when with my 8 basic habits is I have people go through and track exactly where they are right now. And then the first thing that I suggest is pick the low hanging fruit. When we look at habit formation,
Mm,
we really cannot like do all of it at the same time.
sure.
And I think that if there's one takeaway that I want the listeners to walk away with, it's that you can half ass your health. I hope I can swear.
I remember that headline from one of your newsletters, your blog. That was
Yeah.
great.
And it's true. Like, just lean in. And so, like, when we're talking about vegetables, if that's like the easiest thing, or if that's the thing that you're finding is most glaring, then let's start small. Add one additional serving of vegetables a day, or a half a serving. Like, it does not have to be an overnight success. We all want to be overnight successes. However, it's way too uncomfortable, and we will not stick with it if we bite off more than we can chew. And that's the thing, is that when we start new habits, we're all motivated and we think, well, I'm always going to be motivated to do this. But unfortunately, motivation is a fickle beast, and it's never going to be around when you need it most.
Mhm.
And so, if there are other things that you can do, and once you start to build momentum, you will then start to gain more motivation because you'll get the results. And so, yeah, if there's one thing that I can say, it's as far as your question goes, it's figure out what's easiest for you. Like, which of the habits is the one that you think is going to help you the most? And actually, I will say one thing, and that is when a client comes to me and sleep is one of her complaints, that even though she might come to me wanting to lose weight or wanting to get stronger or just wanting to reduce her hormonal symptoms,
Mm.
I will often start with getting her sleep in line, because when we have better sleep, we are more equipped to manage the other issues.
That makes a lot of
So
sense.
to to give you a roundabout answer, um, there you go.
That makes sense. That makes total sense. So, listeners, I want you to think about this 8 basic things daily checklist. It is the great every day of the week. Did you do, these half a dozen things? Boils it down into all of these different areas. So, that's just one of your resources, Elizabeth. If you want to just share with our listeners before we go, and of course, all this will be in the show notes, where can they go for more of what you have to offer?
Yeah, you can find me at elizabethsherman.com. That's my website. And let's see, I'm on Instagram as well as Facebook. Instagram, I'm at elizabeth.sherman.coach. And on Facebook, I'm at Total Health by Eliz, Eliz. And let's see, I have some exciting things coming out in January. So take a look for that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, again, we'll have all that in the show notes, and I think anybody looking for improved health would so benefit from what you have to offer. So thank you so much for all that you do and for being with me today.
Oh, I forgot one thing.
Oh, good.
I have a podcast.
Oh, yes, those
How
are
did
good
I forget
things.
my podcast? My podcast is called Total Health in Midlife. And I have over 200 episodes. And so there's an episode on everything that I've talked about.
Yes,
So
very
thank you
comprehensive.
for letting me include that.
Absolutely. So elizabethsherman.com will show them all of that. So go check it out, ladies. Thank you.